What's up, Jimmy boys and Jimmy girls? Welcome back to yet another 9th Age Fantasy Battles Battle Report 4500 version 2 2020 Battle Report. I'm your host as always, Omarcomin, and this is a game from last night against another local player named Ubergit. I'm going to call him Ubergit because he is playing the Orcs and Goblins. I don't know if anyone noticed this, but earlier this week I launched a regional ladder, competitive ladder for the province of Ontario, and this is one of the first games to be played under that, competitive rule set or guidelines or whatever, but within that framework. So pretty exciting for both of us. It's good to see a little more activity in the Ontario 9th Age scene, and just more North American players on Universal Battles in general. So there's lots of fun to be had. So if you're interested in joining that, we're not going to limit it to Ontario, as it turns out. There's been a fair amount of interest from players from across Canada. So we're going to open it up to pretty much anyone across Canada or even the northern United States, anyone who's kind of in that Eastern Standard or thereabouts time zone. So if anyone does want to join, you can hit me up on the forums or in the comments below, and I'll share a link. 4,500 point game here against the Orcs and Goblins. This guy's name is Jeremy, so I might refer to him as Jeremy every once in a while. Jeremy's brought a pretty interesting list here from left to right. He's got the 4 wolf chariots. He's got a git launcher, a skewer, gargantula, which has the general's hatred on it. Then he's got 20 or 25 crossbow orcs with shields. So they've got parry. Then he's got 2 chariots, boar chariots. One's a BSB and one's just a regular. And then he's got the Savage Orc Head Bashers in the middle with the green tide banners. Very scary unit there. Git Launcher, another Gargantula. That one has the Slinger though, so the Web Launcher. And then another set of 4 Wolf Rider Chariots. So pretty fighty, pretty heavy list here. The objective is Frontline Clash, and the primary objective is Breakthrough, which is probably one of my favorites with this army. This here's deployment, and as you can see, following the typical strategy of refusing one flank, placing a minimal sort of presence there to tie up some units, and then overloading on a separate flank. So I think I chose side here, and he deployed first, so I chose the top. Basically to force him to contend with those ruins in his deployment zone, and to allow me nice wide open shooting lanes with my 2 cannons on his gargantulas. So that was the game plan, was to take good advantage of that, and I think it worked out okay. In hindsight, perhaps it would have been better to take bottom and then place the cannons on the hill. But with how I would have had to deploy to do that and the speed of his army, I think the cannons would have been effectively sitting ducks up there. So pretty happy with how I deployed generally. I did have a Kingsguard unit in my front line for a change, which is a little bit different for me, and I actually quite liked the threat that was able to represent. So yeah, so that was deployment, and then Orcs and Goblins will have the first turn. So, Orcs and Goblins, end of turn 1. He starts to move up fairly aggressively, taking about half of the midfield with his 2 big blocks, and as expected, comes pretty heavy on the western flank with his large Gargantula. So in terms of movement, the scariest things right now are that unit of wolf chariots in the west, who are now threatening a charge on my rangers, and the Gargantula in the east. Nothing else is really a huge charge threat at this moment, so feeling like I'm in a pretty good position, having not moved yet. The vanguards you see in the center are probably the only thing really in immediate danger. And of course the 2 units of Rangers who were placed as scouts. The 1 unit in the west I placed behind the wall so that they would be hit on 5s in combat with shields. And this is so we'll talk about how that goes. So in his magic phase, my opponent managed to get in his totemic summon, and I let it through. I was holding on to my devouring, my Rune of Devouring, hoping he might get what's it called? Savage Fury or Awaken the Beast. I was waiting for him to get Awaken the Beast, but he failed the cast on it, so I couldn't eat it this turn. His spells are Awaken the Beast, Totemic Summon, he's got Scarification, Bring the Pain, and I think Swarm of Insects. So pretty decent set of spells there, but the one really concerning, I guess Bring the Pain is pretty good too, but the really main concern for combat buffs is Awaken the Beast, so I'm prioritizing that one for the Rune of Devouring. In shooting, he has a pretty good amount of shooting for what's on the table, so he didn't get to shoot his crossbows because I think he marched, but he does have the 3 War Machines, and those Git launchers I think managed to do 2 wounds onto my back cannon, and the other cannon also has a wound, so perhaps he must have hit with another one as well. So we got 3 wounds on the cannons already. Not great this early, but not too much else happening. It looks like he also chipped a wound off of one of those warriors in the center. I'm not sure how exactly. And then the chariots in the east managed to do a wound onto those Rangers. So that's going to be it for his turn 1. I think I'm set up for some pretty cheeky maneuvers here now that he's taken some space, so we will proceed to Dwarven Hold's turn 1. So in my first turn, no charges to declare. I don't think that's much of a surprise, but I do move up my vanguarding units of warriors, or vanguard unit of warriors, to present a flank charge to his head bashers and start shuffling forward with the rest. In the east, I move up a unit of warriors and try to set a bit of a trap here. So the intention was if he charged the Rangers, they would stand and shoot, probably get worked, but the warriors would be able to offer either a supporting charge or a counter charge, assuming he breaks the Rangers. And then the alternative was if he charged the warriors, I could flee into the backfield, and my general's unit could, if he catches me, could follow up, or if he fails charge, I have a counter charge with the Rangers and potentially a Kingsguard unit. So that was the intent. In terms of other moves, I just start taking a bit of territory for myself. I've set up a charge lane for the second Kingsguard unit from the left. So if those Savage Orc Head Bashers charge that unit of warriors in front of them in the flank, and they overrun, potentially I could have a nice juicy rear charge there, along with some supporting warrior charges. And he's going to have to, upon breaking that unit and passing a restrain test, he's going to have to reform some way to protect himself from being combo charged on the next turn. So that's the trap. The spider charging was still a concern. I mean, I think it's like a 17 or 18 inch charge there, so still a very possible charge for him to make onto those warriors in the center, but everything more or less is supported should he have made that charge. So feeling like I'm in a pretty strong position, with the main weakness being in the east, with that little dilemma between the Rangers and Warriors. In the west, where the other Rangers are, they've moved up into the wall to be hit on 5s in combat. Really, my goal here was to try to stick around over there as long as possible and tie up that one Gargantula, so that I'm only dealing with one monstrous threat at a time. And the more I can keep that thing busy and away from my units, I think the better. It's a 267 point unit of Rangers over there versus a 510 point spider, so pretty reasonable. I did put the hatred on that spider over there, again with the intention of either doing a handful more wounds or keeping it busy a little bit longer. So we will see how that goes. In my shooting phase, it looks like one of my cannons did 3 wounds to the Gargantula down in the bottom. It looks like the Rangers in the east did 2 wounds onto the chariots, and the Rangers in the west did 1 wound onto the Gargantula. So not too bad. Magic, it looks like I got a resilience in and a revocation on the Ed Bashes. Yeah, and nothing else really of note. So we'll move on. Unfortunately, I am missing a slide, so there is a turn in here missing. This is actually end of Dwarves turn 2, but the Orc and Goblin turn 2 I'll try to run down and summarize really quickly. So he charged in the west with his Gargantula against my Rangers, who managed to do, I think, a total of 1 wound in their stand and shoot. So a little bit disappointing there. Obviously, it's a very short charge, so he made it in. In the west, his unit of chariots charged the warrior unit, who fled and I think rolled an 8, but he did manage to catch them on, I think, an 11, run them down, and then reform. So he's now threatening my backline, which is a bit frightening. In combat, the cannon that's now gone in the far west did stick around for another turn, so he didn't manage to kill it in his turn, so it was still there at the start of my Dwarves turn 2. And in the west, where the Gargantula charged those Rangers, they did manage to stick around for 1 turn of combat, so I think that they managed to do about 3 wounds to it on the charge. So he charged with the 5-ops to hit me with the wall and with shields and parry. He didn't manage to do, I think, much more than 2 or 3 wounds onto the Rangers, and I did 3 back. So I think I only lost by 1 or 2 in the end, and managed to stick on a 7. So they stuck around for an extra round into my turn, which was great. And in the center, his head bashers charged my unit of warriors and broke them, but there were 3 remaining that fled, I think 3 or 4 inches. He did not choose to chase them down and leave himself vulnerable, so they're sitting there now in the center of the field. In his magic phase, it looks like he got Awaken the Beast off, which I would have eaten. And I think he did something kind of sneaky to get rid of my revocation before doing that. So that's sort of it for magic. In the shooting phase, I believe he did some work with his Git launchers on my King's unit. They're also webbed, so he hit them with the Gargantula, which caused them to take dangerous terrain tests. You'll see there's quite a few spear bodies missing from that unit now, and I'll get to that in a little bit. I think that's essentially it for the Orcs and Goblins turn 2. He reformed in the center to basically present frontal charges to all of my units, but I opted in my turn to not to charge him. So what I've done is I've moved up my center unit of warrior to again chaff him. This time he'd have a front charge on that unit of warriors in the center with his orc head bashers, and now what I'm trying to do is work around his flanks. So I've got the one unit of Kingsguard to the east of that chaffing unit of warriors, ready to charge into the flank should he elect to take that charge on the warriors. And then I've got another one a bit further out that could also potentially offer a support charge in the flank, depending how far those Ed Bashers overrun. I've got additional support both at the center unit if he overruns, coming from the west in that unit of Kingsguard, and feeling pretty good in general. I do march forward with my Rangers at this point, hitting that Gargantula behind that wall. Just didn't seem attractive, so I'm moving up with them to try to take the objective. I did declare a charge in my turn. The Kings, or the Brunesmiths unit, had a 10-inch charge on those chariots, which would have been a 7, but I failed on a 1-1, and then I lost 6 bodies to a dangerous terrain test. So that was pretty devastating. And now they're in a really terrible position with those wolf chariots pressing down on them. In combat, my Rangers ultimately lost combat to the Gargantula. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. They fled, I think, in 11 and ran off the table, and he pursued and is now sort of sitting there like a big dumb spider. So I did manage to rally that little unit of 3 warriors in the center, which is great because now they are chaffing and can potentially hold something up or redirect it a little bit. So that's good. My miners did arrive, showed up behind the Gargantula and did 1 wound onto it in shooting. In this round, I did hit with my cannon at the top, but unfortunately, I rolled a 1 on my 2 wound roll, so that's pretty terrible. You'll see the way I've placed the unit of warriors in front of that Gargantula. The intention there is if he does elect to charge, now that I have a threat in his rear, his overrun will take them into the front of that Kingsguard unit, which is, it only has 4 wounds left, so even against them, I don't know if that's necessarily a winning proposition for that big spider. So we'll see. It seemed like a pretty strong move to me. Hermanard, I'd be looking to you for an alternative suggestion here. That's their max march. I thought about trying to redirect it so that it would have to run off to the east a little bit and away from that big combat in the center, but I couldn't make it work without him being able to basically just charge past me into another potential unit. So that is Dwarves' turn 2, and I guess Goblins' turn 2, all in one. There you go. Here we go, Orcs and Goblins' turn 3. He charged his head bashers into the unit of warriors that were chaffing them. He charged his Gargantula into the unit of warriors directly in front of them. He charged his BSB chariot into the side of that 3-man unit of warriors that was in the center. And then in the west with his crossbow brick, he charged my 10-man unit of warriors that was chaffing them. I fled with that unit. They popped out through the Kingsguard by the anvil there, and everyone passed their panic check, so that was great. And you'll see that my general's unit is gone, so he charged me with that unit of chariots, which unfortunately ended quite badly for me. In magic phase, it doesn't look like he got anything this turn. He probably has scarification, or no, I don't think he got anything this turn. So he didn't get any magic in. Still has that totem in the back, and in shooting, it doesn't look like he got much of anything. So in combat, that unit of Wolf Riders, I hugely underestimated the threat of it. I mean, I did intend to catch them with a charge, and in my mind probably should have on a 7, but having failed that, they did about 22 impact hits. Those things apparently get d6 plus 1 impact hits. Let me just double check that. Yeah, d6 plus 1 impact hits per unit. So he ended up with something like 22 impact hits on me and just killed a massive number of dwarves. I think it ended up doing something like 14 or 15 wounds. So right away my unit was completely depleted. I don't even think I had a full third rank to hit him with spears. And in terms of my own attacks back, I think I completely fluffed it. And if I managed to do, I think, one more wound, I would have broken his rank and been steadfast, but failed to do so, and he ran down my command unit. So I lost my BSB, I lost my general, and I lost a 400 or 500 point unit of spears all in one throw. So that was pretty devastating. Down below, that unit of 10 warriors and the head bashers get destroyed, but on his overrun, I think he rolls nice and low, so he's 1 inch away from that Kingsguard unit in front of them. And then the Gargantula, sort of the same thing happened. He charged that 10-man unit of warriors, killed all but 2. They fled, popped out through the far side of my Kingsguard unit, and he rolled, I think, 2 inches shy of what he needed to make his overrun into my unit of Kingsguard waiting behind. So I'm now positioned pretty strongly here. The trap is kind of set. Ideally, you don't want to lose your command unit. However, I think there was a bit of bad luck involved. And good luck on his part. I mean, the spike potential of those wolf chariots is pretty extreme, so he could have rolled much worse and potentially only had, I don't know, 8, 10 impact hits, in which case I would have been easily steadfast and would have had an opportunity to at least hold. I think without impact hits, that grind ultimately ends up in my favor, but that is 9th Age Fantasy Battles 2.0. So, here's where we're left at the end of Orcs and Goblins turn 3. And this is where the fun begins. You'll notice there are no longer any Gargantulas on the table, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Charges in my turn. The Kingsguard unit directly in front of the Head Bashers charged them head on. The nearest unit of Kingsguard with the Gargantula just in front of it charged the flank of the Head Bashes. So I'm in his front and his flank with roughly 15 Kingsguard each, so a total of 30. In the west, my other unit of Kingsguard charged his crossbow boys, and down below, my miners charged his Git launcher with a overrun charge into the rear of the Gargantula possible. And in the far east, my rangers, I think, had a 12-inch charge, so charged the flank of that Gargantula and managed to make it in too. So they needed a 9, I think, and made it. So all charges were successful, and that is pretty friggin' sexy. In Magic, I got nothing through, unfortunately. It would have been really great to have got a buff onto that unit of Kingsguard in the front of the Ed Bashes, and probably would have made the combat go a whole lot better. However, my opponent played a pretty savvy counter magic phase to me, and all I got was revocation off on his general. So that was it for Magic. In terms of shooting, the cannon that is has a totem breathing down its neck managed to hit the Gargantula on 3 wound, and then did the remaining, I think it had 5 wounds on it, so the remaining three wounds onto that Gargantula and pop it. So that is a huge win for us. No other shooting of note, so in combat, the miners destroyed the Git launcher, made it into the rear of the Gargantula. He targeted all his attacks on the Gargantula into the miners and did quite a bit of damage on them. I think there's 4 remaining there, but with the 3 or 4 wounds that it had already, it died pretty easily. And I made a bit of a mistake here. So following that combat, the way the Kingsguard were positioned after completing their charge, they were a bit further down on that unit of head bashes. There was actually only 3 of the Kingsguard that completed the charge and were in base to base with the head bashes. So when I reformed my unit of Kingsguard that killed the Gargantula, I for some reason decided to keep them pointing to the bottom of the board when I should have reformed them to face the center of the board, and as a result that has some implications for the remainder of the game. But just a really boneheaded move. I don't know what I was thinking. All of the action on the board is to their left, or I guess to my left, their right. But I don't know, just a mental lapse. Combat with the head bashes, these guys are pretty friggin' scary. He had just a ridiculous number of attacks to the front. Managed to hit with most of them. They have battle focus, and it looks like he did a total of 6 wounds onto that unit in front. In return, I believe I did 9, but my opponent rolled a 1-1 on his panic check, and with his 2 ranks and his 6 wounds in return, I think he did 7 wounds in return actually to my 9, so he managed to stick around, which was pretty devastating. I had hoped to have an overrun charge with the eastern unit of Kingsguard. It would have been a huge one, like an 11 or a 12, to make it into the crossbow boys, but instead the head bashes stick around. In combat with the crossbows, this one really shocked me. I think there was a bit of bad dice going on, but I only managed to do 2 wounds onto those crossbows. So the combination of parry and my terrible dice and the allocation of attacks onto his general, I did do 2 wounds onto his general, allowed him to remain steadfast. So that combat will go on, unfortunately. So with the 2 Arachnaroks dead, or 2, I called them Arachnaroks from James from Shyhammer, shout out, holler, Shytown. This is what we're left with, and feeling like we're in a pretty strong position at this point. Being in his flank with pretty much no support possible for those head bashers makes me feel pretty good. I did do a combat reform there to bring more Kingsguard into base to base with his head bashers. We had some debate about this. When you do a combat reform, I'm not sure, based on the rules, I believe they're on page 79, it doesn't say you have to maintain your center, you just have to maintain the same number, at least the same number of models in base to base. So I believe that this was a legal move to basically slide over and bring more units into combat, but I would appreciate someone's input on that. I'm not sure if we resolved it exactly correctly. Yeah. So here we go, Orcs and Goblins, turn 4. He charges the anvil with his chariots. He charges his BSB at my Kingsguard unit that were misplaced, or that I reformed incorrectly for a flank charge, so I flee with them. And they made, I think, a 8 or a 9-inch flee, so that put them pretty safely out of range. He tests to redirect on the Rangers, who also flee, giving him a fail charge. That's it for his charges. In the main combat in the center, he got Bring the Pain off on the frontal unit, so he's re-rolling failed to hit attacks there against them, so that is not so great. But with the additional units, the additional models in the flank, I managed to kill a very large number of models, leaving him with 3. So those 3 flee, and as a result cause his BSB to fail a leadership check. I think he was leadership 8, and out of the bubble of the general, which would have given him 9. So he fails, and his BSB is now fleeing. That unit of head bashers is now fleeing. And in the combat with his general's unit, the crossbows, again, after allocating, I think, allocated another 3 attacks against his general. He managed to save them, and I think I only did another 3 or 4 wounds there, so that combat continues to push or tilt ever so slightly in my, or in his favor, I should say. The anvil, he only managed to do 3 wounds, so and I think the anvil did 2 wounds, so managed to eliminate 1 model. And the totem, it looks like, finally made it into that cannon, but the damage is already done. I believe I rallied both of my units. Sorry. They had rallied previously, yeah, so they rallied in the last turn, so both of those little warrior units that are sort of in the backfield are both rallied. So I'm in a pretty good position after this turn. Magic-wise, I think, yeah, all I got was Bring the Pain. So, I think at this point he saw the writing on the wall and it was getting pretty late, so he wanted to end it up, but we managed to finish the Dorth turn 4 so that we could call this one fairly decisively. So this is the end of Dorv's turn 4. Did some rapid hammer here, so the unit of warriors that had rallied and were in the flank of that unit of chariots obviously charged them in the flank. Down below, the miners had a clip charge on his BSB, so charged at him, caused him to flee off the table, and then redirected at that unit of Ed Bashes directly in front of them, which caused them to flee even further. The 10-man unit of Kingsguard also charged those head bashes, which sent them through his remaining units, causing the wolf chariots to flee and take 3 dangerous terrain wounds. His other chariot did not flee past its leadership test. And so at this point, after combat, the warriors killed those chariots. It looks like the combat with the crossbows pushed again, or at least I did a handful more wounds than he did, and he managed to stick around on a steadfast. And this is how we end up. So my unit of Kingsguard are now potentially threatening a flank charge onto his crossbows. Pretty much all his remaining combat units, his chariots and his 3 head bashers, are fleeing. He's got 1 boar chariot left, no BSB, 2 wounds on his general, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scoring units, 6 scoring units, plus 2, far more combat elements than him. So this basically gets called here, with the assumption that I would ultimately get his general and his crossbows, and he might get that 1 unit of Kingsguard, although you'll see I didn't calculate for that exactly on the next slide, but that's pretty much where we end up. So the perseverance, the grinding power, and the I guess forcing him into situations where I would be in his flanks paid off ultimately. It looked pretty grim there for a minute or 2, but yeah. I think I have one more slide actually where we resolve at least his rallies to decide what actually ultimately happens. So we'll just show you that really quick. Yeah, so on his turn we attempted to do the rallies. His wolf chariots continued to flee off the table. His head bashers continued to flee. And so he's basically left with nothing in essentially an impossible position. So we called it there. Ends up being about a 17-0. Actually, it would have been a 15-6 or a 14-6. Yeah, 14-6, and then assuming I get the objective, I mean I have two turns left to march through to his deployment zone. The miners are pretty much there already, and I think the Rangers will make it as well, so we'll get the objective, no question. But overall, a really good game. Interesting list, a lot of very scary combat elements, but I think the lack of his ability to dictate my movement without any kind of chaff or any kind of really aggressive moves to prevent me from creating those overlapping charges and flank charges cost him. Here you see the result. I actually thought I was going to lose once I lost my general, but it just goes to show you army-wide leadership 9 is pretty powerful, and I think, you know, playing against his leadership, so forcing him onto those fleas once they started, and the cascading fleas really helped me out. Like if I had to fight his BSB, would have been pretty bloody. He might have could potentially have killed one of my unit of Kingsguard or one of my other smaller combat elements. But there you have it. Pretty interesting game. I made one or two really bad mistakes. I'm sure I made many more if you're a better player than I am. But overall, I felt I played pretty well, and you know, I felt reasonably in control of the game. Again, abandoning sort of your backline. You know, I think most Dwarven players would call this heresy, but I think that's kind of what you have to do. If you try to defend your war machines, they're practically indefensible to begin with, but you just waste so many resources trying to protect them. I think the best you can hope for is 2 to 3 rounds of shooting before they get tied up indefinitely. And even the anvil, I'm finding, you know, allowing something to charge that is really not a big deal. It can continue to cast, as far as I know. If someone could clarify that, I haven't seen anywhere that says it can't cast when it's in combat. But it's pretty robust, and against most things, I don't think it would stand up to a totem, but against most things, it stands up pretty resiliently. And if you do manage to get a supporting unit there, then you're basically going to get it for free, because that anvil is so tough and unbreakable. Not sure if there's any other lessons. I mean, I think I do think I could have used my rangers a bit better. I probably could have used them to whittle that unit of Ed Bashes. I'm not sure. It's tough, because when I deploy them in the center of my battle line, it basically means that piece of my battle line is immobile, so I kind of have to deploy them on the flanks. And in this case, the 12-man unit was kind of sacrificial. Probably could have put the 10-man unit there instead, but those are little things. So yeah, all in all, pretty happy with that game. Really good player in Jeremy. I think he'll probably have me next time. I suspect he put this list together pretty quickly, because he hadn't played in quite a while. Yeah, I think next time we'll have a more balanced game, but in general, pretty happy. So that's it for me today. Stay Jimmy, boys and girls, and we'll see you next time.